I've opened up the question of the open canon, and even given some of my criteria for considering if something is inspired. Then a funny thing happened a few weeks back that I felt provided an excellent opportunity to sharpen some of what I meant. I attended New and Living Way Church in my hometown of Kelso, Washington. I attend a different church every Sunday with my son. I do this because I like to see what all is out there in Christianity. This was a very unique experience for me, however. Pastor Todd Beale gave a sermon that was a part of a series. Obviously, I haven't been there for the beginning of the series, and I'm not going to be there for the rest of it. As such, I might have been missing something. I want to be careful about how I portray this church and her pastor, because I don't want to misrepresent them. But that much said, there was a feeling to what was being said that I can use as a jumping-off point for other things I want to say anyway. As a one-time visitor, it's easy to miss something vital to a message, particularly when it is part of a series. This isn't intended as a commentary on the theology of either Pastor Beale or New and Living Way Church, just as a jumping-off point for things I already wanted to find a way to say and just needed a starting place to make my points. The sermon was primarily about obeying the precepts of God. Along the way, Pastor Beale spoke about specific commands from the Bible that he feels people are ignoring in today's world. I don't remember which he brought up. That didn't matter to me. But then he shifted to the Constitution. While I don't remember him specifically saying which Constitution, specific mention of freedom of the press and bicameral representation, as well as the overall context leads me to highly suspect that he intended the United States Constitution to be understood. Pastor Beale then went on to suggest that part of the problem with America today is that we ignore God's precepts, and then to point out that we are ignoring the precepts of the Constitution. The implication seemed clear to me. Pastor Beale was placing the Constitution of the United States of America in the list of documents he considers inspired. Now, I can't be sure, but just from the feel of the church, I imagine that they and I would disagree about the inspiration of the Athanasian Creed. I'm not sure, I could be wrong. That could be something that they get right and assign inspiration to as well. But for the sake of the discussion, let's assume that they reject the Athanasian Creed, and let's go on to suppose that they do embrace the Constitution as inspired by God, which I currently reject. How do we come to such opposite conclusions? This gets to the core of one of the fundamental problems with religious investigation right now. If two people disagree about a theological conclusion, how do we decide who is more correct? In math, they have proofs. In particle physics, they have experiments. In stellar physics, they have telescopic observations. In psychology, they have surveys. In medicine, they have clinical trials. In so many areas of study, there is an agreed method of testing an idea. This isn't true in theology. This isn't altogether bad. The ideas about what condition is necessary for a clinical trial, as one example, have evolved greatly over time. There have been various attempts to create objective tests for theological theories through the centuries. In the United States, the two most well-known of these are probably the various forms of ecclesiastical infallibility expressed by the Roman Catholic Church and sola scriptura, as expressed in various Protestant denominations. Ecclesiastical infallibility will have to wait for another post, but I hope that the problem with sola scriptura solving this particular problem is apparent. There's no divine table of contents. There's no recognized objective measure of inspiration. Pastor Beale will quote freedom of the press to me, and I will quote the descent of Christ to hell to them, and we are likely to disagree on fine points simply because of which documents we accept as inspired. And since no one gets it all right all the time, we likely both get some things wrong. How do we decide who is closer to correct? There is a certain element to sola scriptura that speaks to me. One of the criticisms of religion by other academics is that if we started a new society on a remote planet, they would discover the same math and physics that we have. I don't know if this is true for math. Math has been as much a text-driven tradition as religion. Euclid's geometry famously used a set of axioms that prevent trisecting an arbitrary angle. This is actually fairly unique to the constraints Euclid chose. Other systems, which made slightly different decisions, did not face this problem. However, because of Euclid's special places in the textual history of mathematics in the Western world, a lot of ink has been spilled trying to either do it or prove it can't be done. In another world where Euclidean geometry doesn't gain a foothold so early, we would have a different mathematics history. Math and theology have something in common. They are both textual, philosophical traditions. The last text influences the next text. Some texts get a much stronger place in history due to their usefulness. Other texts fall to the side mostly unnoticed. And both of them have occasionally found themselves under the thumb of politicians that are trying to push a particular agenda. Yes, even math. The most published book of all time is the Bible. The second most published book of all time is Euclid's Elements. This is yet another way that math and religion are so similar. The great books of each are the most published. But Elements isn't the publication we are evaluating today. The Constitution is. So I'll leave that conversation to another day. The Constitution is one of the founding documents for our nation. As such, it is no surprise to find that the Constitution is published and distributed here, in America. What is striking is how seldom our Constitution is referenced as a moral authority outside our country. Because our country was early in nation building, there was a flurry of constitutions that were inspired by ours, but they rapidly improved on ours, and now the American Constitution actually ranks fairly low in the freedoms it guarantees. Since the Constitution is still part of the American legal code, it's not a surprise that we would reference it within the U.S. Even those who disagree with what it has to say have to live by what it says. Before the Civil War, abolitionists still had to count slaves as 3/5 of a person, even though they knew it was wrong. But since the French never did, they weren't even aware of that tidbit of American history. This means that inside America, we are compelled by circumstance to use the Constitution, while those who are not feel free to disregard it. Let's compare that to the Athanasian Creed. No one compelled the churches that have accepted it to do so. This can be seen by the fact that the Eastern Orthodox Church has not accepted the creed. However, the Roman Catholic Church, the Anglican Church, the Lutheran Church, and many Reformed churches across the world have all signed on to the Athanasian Creed. They have not been pressured into doing this. In fact, as it has become apparent that Athanasius didn't write the creed, there has been some slight pressure against it. After all, if we don't know who wrote it, how do we know they weren't a bad guy? Despite this pressure, political and ideological enemies have been able to look at the same document and say, "At least we agree on that." I've chosen the weakest of the 4 great creeds on purpose. Anytime someone like me proposes that we open the canon, there's going to be strong cases and there will be weak cases. I highly doubt that I'll get real pushback about the Apostles' Creed. At most theologians will say that they disagree that it's inspired, but that they don't mind if I am wrong on that point. It wouldn't be fair to compare the strongest case against another. But with the Athanasian Creed, there will be those that complain that it's only a Western tradition, that it's too hard to nail down the author, and that his text is uncertain at some points. All valid points to consider in another place. But if you stack the Athanasian Creed against the Constitution, I think it becomes obvious why the Athanasian Creed is up for consideration and the Constitution is not.